Every morning you flip on the news and get hit with the same thing. Noise, outrage, finger-pointing headlines designed to distract you. But underneath all that chaos, something far more calculated is happening. And almost no one is talking about it. Right now in real time, the guardrails that protect your rights, your vote, and our democracy are being quietly dismantled. And the proof, we just saw it. Just weeks ago, the Supreme Court handed down a ruling that should send a chill through anyone who cares about fair elections. With one decision, they opened the door for states like Texas to execute blatant partisan power grabs. Moves that could silence millions of voters and tilt the balance of power in Congress for decades. This isn't abstract. This isn't theoretical. This is the kind of decision that rewrites the rules of democracy while most people are too overwhelmed by the daily noise to notice. Here's the deal. For years, we've fought to ensure that every vote counts, that districts are drawn fairly, not to rig the game. But this decision coming out of the Texas versus Miller case overturned lower court rulings that had blocked new congressional maps. These weren't just any maps. They were explicitly designed to flip as many as 5 Democratic-held seats to Republicans. The court's argument that states can redraw districts for partisan reasons so long as they don't explicitly target a specific race, come on, man. That's a distinction without a difference when the outcome is clear. Less representation for minority communities. Less voice for those who've been historically marginalized. It's a dangerous precedent that opens the door for states across the country to manipulate their political landscapes mid-decade even, all for partisan gain. This isn't just about Texas. It's about the integrity of every election, every ballot, and every voice in our democracy. And this isn't an isolated incident. This is part of a much larger, more coordinated strategy that's been unfolding quietly, methodically, right under our noses. While the Supreme Court was busy shifting power on paper, something equally dramatic and, frankly, deeply troubling was happening inside the very heart of our justice system, the Department of Justice, specifically in the Civil Rights Division, where a new Assistant Attorney General, Harriet Dillon, arrived with a very different agenda than what this nation has always stood for. You see, for generations, the Civil Rights Division has been the frontline defense for Americans facing discrimination. It's been about ensuring equal protection under the law for everyone, especially those who face systemic barriers because of their race, religion, gender, or orientation. But in literally her second week on the job, Ms. Dillon issued a memo that was nothing short of a declaration of war on these long-held principles. This memo, folks, stated that the division would now prioritize dismantling all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, not just within the department, but across the nation. It committed to burying transgender rights policies and weeding out anti-Christian bias. Now, I believe in protecting the rights of all Americans, absolutely. But when you declare war on established civil rights protections, when you target specific groups, that's not about equality. That's about turning back the clock. And the response was immediate. Over 100 dedicated, experienced civil rights attorneys, professionals who had spent their careers fighting for justice, resigned on the spot. Let that sink in. A third of the division's legal staff walked out because they were told they had to abandon the very mission they swore to uphold. Ms. Dillon, instead of expressing concern, doubled down. She publicly welcomed these resignations, calling them a sign that nature was healing and that the administrative state was taking itself out. As of just weeks ago, upwards of 70% of that division, over 200 attorneys have now accepted resignation offers. They are gone. This wasn't a mass firing. This was a deliberate ideological purge, folks. And it leaves you and your family less protected against discrimination, less secure in your fundamental rights, when the very arm of government meant to protect your civil rights is intentionally weakened. Who suffers? We all do. Before I get deeper into how this impacts our national security, hit that subscribe button. It helps us cut through the noise and deliver the truth that impacts your daily life. Now let's talk about something else that hits close to home for every taxpayer: fraud. We've seen a disturbing situation unfold in Minneapolis where federal prosecutors have uncovered what they're calling one of the largest welfare fraud schemes in American history. We're talking about billions, yes, billions with a B, stolen from programs designed to feed hungry children, provide housing assistance and care for vulnerable populations. This is a betrayal of public trust, plain and simple, and it's unacceptable.
The investigation alleges a network centered within parts of the Somali community in Minnesota, siphoning off funds, with some of that money potentially ending up in the hands of Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda-linked terror group.
Here's the thing, folks. Fraud is fraud. And when it happens, it needs to be rooted out, prosecuted, and the perpetrators held accountable. This isn't about blaming an entire community. It's about criminal activity that harms everyone, especially the very people these programs are meant to help. But what truly troubles me is the narrative being spun around this. For years, there were warnings, delayed audits, a lack of robust oversight. And now under this administration, we see a massive, highly visible federal enforcement action with over 100 federal agents, armored vehicles, and dozens of arrests. While accountability is crucial, the question we must ask is why it festered for so long and whether this administration's broader approach to dismantling the administrative state will actually make us more vulnerable to such large-scale fraud in the future. When you gut agencies, when you demonize career civil servants, you lose the very expertise and institutional knowledge needed to prevent these things from happening in the first place. This isn't just about prosecuting criminals. It's about building and maintaining strong, competent government institutions that protect your taxpayer dollars with effective oversight. And the situation in Minneapolis isn't isolated. It connects to other troubling reports like the indictment of Iman Osman, a Somali man elected to the city council in Luan, Maine. He's facing felony charges for allegedly stealing firearms tied to a condemned property linked to a massive drug raid involving methamphetamine, cocaine, fentanyl, and firearms. And yet he was about to be sworn into public office. This raises serious questions about accountability, about vetting, and about how individuals with such backgrounds can not only get elected but remain in positions of public trust. This isn't about identity. It's about integrity. It's about ensuring that those who seek to represent us are held to the highest standards. When we allow these kinds of issues to slide, when we prioritize political narratives over basic accountability, it erodes public trust in our institutions. And that, my friends, is a direct threat to our democracy. Now let's turn to a case that has haunted our nation for nearly 5 years, the January 6th pipe bombs. 2 live explosive devices placed outside the Republican and Democratic National Committee headquarters the night before the attack on the Capitol. It was a clear act of domestic terrorism, and for years the FBI told us they were working the case, reviewing millions of data points, but with no arrest. Then suddenly, under this new administration, an arrest is made. Brian Cole, a 30-year-old from Woodbridge, Virginia. Now, an arrest in a case like this is a good thing, a relief for many. But here's what truly gives me pause. Officials admitted there was no new evidence, no new tip. What changed, they claimed, was the investigation itself. A new team that re-examined evidence the prior administration, they said, refused and failed to do. Come on, man. The idea that the evidence was sitting there the whole time and that the previous administration, my administration, lacked the will or focus to solve such a critical national security threat, that's a dangerous narrative. It implies political interference in law enforcement, a selective application of justice. The FBI is made up of dedicated patriotic agents who work tirelessly to protect this nation regardless of who is in the White House. To suggest that their efforts were somehow hobbled by a lack of will under a different administration is a disservice to their professionalism and raises deeply troubling questions about the political motivations behind this timing and the framing of this arrest. Justice should be blind. It should not be a political tool. The truth of what happened on January 6th and who was responsible for those bombs must be revealed, but it must be done with integrity, not with political spin. Folks, the truth is protecting our democracy is something we all have to take seriously. Every decision made in the highest offices affects our future, and it's up to us to stay informed and hold those in power accountable. By becoming a member of this channel, you're not just supporting this work, you're joining a community committed to shining a light on the truth and defending the institutions that keep our nation strong. Stand with us, help expose what's happening, and make sure your voice is part of the fight for the America we believe in. While law enforcement was grappling with these complex issues, we saw another troubling development, one that speaks volumes about the weaponization of our justice system. I'm talking about the attempted mortgage fraud charges against New York Attorney General Letitia James. Now, Miss James has been a vocal opponent of Donald Trump and his business empire, and she's pursued legal action against him. But when the Trump Justice Department attempted to bring mortgage fraud charges against her, charges that had previously been thrown out by a court, something very unusual happened. A grand jury, after hearing the evidence, declined to indict. Think about that for a second. In the legal world, there's an old saying, a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich. Grand juries typically go along with what prosecutors recommend because the bar for indictment is probable cause, not guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. For a grand jury to decline an indictment is a significant event. It signals that either the evidence was weaker than prosecutors believed or the jurors themselves had serious doubts about the case. This isn't about whether Miss James is guilty or innocent of anything. It's about the integrity of the process. When a Justice Department under a political administration pursues charges against a prominent political opponent, and those charges are so weak they can't even get a grand jury indictment, it screams of political weaponization. It undermines public trust in our legal system and turns justice into a political football. We saw far too much of this in the past, and it's a dangerous path for any democracy to tread. We need a justice system that is fair, impartial, and focused on upholding the law, not on settling political scores. And speaking of national security, let's talk about the war on drugs, or more accurately, the war on terror networks that are absolutely devastating our communities, especially with the surge of fentanyl. For decades, the approach has been interdiction, seize drugs, arrest crews, but it hasn't worked, not effectively. Despite billions spent and thousands of arrests, cartels have grown stronger, more sophisticated, and more brutal. Fentanyl is pouring across our borders, killing tens of thousands of Americans every single year. The violence in places like Mexico and Venezuela has reached levels that rival actual war zones. Now suddenly there's a chorus from some corners echoing the former guy's rhetoric, saying we need to go to the source, that drug lords must have no safe haven. And we saw this play out when the U.S. military struck a boat carrying narcotics off the coast of Venezuela, killing several operatives. The initial media reports, of course, were full of outrage, painting it as an atrocity. But then the details emerged. 2 survivors allegedly climbed back onto the boat, communicating with others salvaging drugs. A second strike was authorized. Here's the thing, folks. I understand the urgency. I understand the need to dismantle these cartels. But this isn't a simple problem with a simple military solution. When you talk about going to the source, when you escalate military action in other countries, you risk unintended consequences. You risk destabilizing regions, alienating allies, and putting our own service members in harm's way without a clear, comprehensive strategy. We need a robust, well-resourced federal government working hand-in-hand with international partners, sharing intelligence, building capacity, and addressing the root causes of this crisis, not just launching unilateral military strikes to treat these cartels as enemy combatants and engage in what amounts to undeclared warfare without a clear strategy and the full backing of Congress and our allies. That's a dangerous gamble for our national security and global standing. It's a job for a strong, competent, and fully functional federal government, not one that's being systematically dismantled. And that, my friends, brings us to the biggest, most insidious shift of all. One that most people haven't fully grasped yet, but one that will define American politics for years to come. While all these individual stories were making headlines, something much larger, much more dangerous has been happening quietly in the background, a systematic restructuring, or more accurately, a systematic dismantling of the federal government itself. We talked about the mass resignations in the Justice Department. That's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
Across multiple agencies, this administration has been using a combination of budgetary tools, personnel reclassifications, and mission redefinitions to fundamentally reshape how the federal government operates.
They call it dismantling the administrative state. And it's happening faster and with more precision than almost anyone anticipated. Here's how it works, folks. First, you have the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, still very much operational despite the media's attempts to downplay it. They're identifying entire programs, offices, and agencies for elimination or severe reduction. Think the Department of Education, USAID, layers of middle management across dozens of departments. This isn't about cutting wasteful spending. It's about gutting critical functions. At the same time, individual agency heads like the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harriet Dillon, are attacking personnel and mission from the inside. They're redefining what their divisions do, who they serve, and what priorities they pursue. And as we saw with those 200 attorneys who resigned, this creates an environment where ideologically entrenched bureaucrats, as they call them, essentially fire themselves. It's a purge, plain and simple, removing dedicated public servants who disagree with the new radical agenda. Then you add in something called Schedule F, which the former guy's administration reinstated on day one. This reclassifies tens of thousands of civil service roles as policymaking positions, stripping them of the protections they normally have and allowing for mass political terminations. This is a direct assault on the nonpartisan civil service, replacing experienced professionals with political loyalists. And finally, there's budgetary impoundment. This is where the president withholds or delays spending of funds that Congress has already appropriated. Now, there are legal limits to this, of course, as Congress controls the purse under Article 1 of the Constitution, but the executive branch has tremendous discretion. And what this administration has been doing is a form of what some call silent impoundment, directing agencies to withhold funds without formally notifying Congress, making it much harder to legally challenge. Put it all together and you have a coordinated pincer movement, folks. Structure and budget from above, personnel and mission from below. The result, this administration has already shed nearly 320,000 federal jobs in one of the largest mass layoffs in Washington's history. And their long-term goal to target up to 75% of the federal workforce over the next 3 years. Now, to some that sounds extreme dangerous even, and it is, because here's the uncomfortable truth that Washington doesn't want to admit. Much of the federal government, the parts that actually work, are serving you. They're protecting your food safety, ensuring clean air and water, securing your borders, delivering your Social Security, and conducting vital research. When you dismantle this administrative state, you're not just cutting red tape. You're cutting the very capacity of government to function, to protect its citizens, and to uphold the rule of law. It's a deliberate effort to weaken our institutions, to replace competence with loyalty, and to undermine the very idea of a government that serves all its people, not just a select few. This isn't just a threat to jobs. It's a threat to national stability, to our ability to respond to crisis, and to the fundamental services that you rely on every single day. All of these pieces, every single one of them, lead to a question that millions of Americans have been asking. Why now? Why is all of this happening at once? And the answer, I think, is simpler and far more insidious than it seems, because for the first time in a very long time, there's an administration in power that is not just willing to talk about reform, not just propose changes, but to systematically, methodically dismantle the structures that have made real democratic change possible. They are tearing down the guardrails, folks, the very guardrails that protect our democracy and ensure our government remains accountable to the people. Think about it individually. Each of these stories seems disconnected. Mass resignations at the DOJ, that's a personnel issue. Supreme Court ruling on redistricting, that's about maps and elections. An arrest in a cold case, that's law enforcement. Fraud in immigrant communities, that's about oversight. Restructuring federal agencies, that's about efficiency. But when you step back and look at the whole picture, you see something much more profound. You see a government in the middle of its most significant ideological and operational transition in decades, not for the better, but for the worse. You see institutions that have been captured by one political worldview being forced to reckon with a different one that actively seeks to weaken them. You see accountability being undermined in places where it's desperately needed, and political loyalty being prioritized over competence and the public good, and the people who built and benefited from the old system, by which I mean the system of checks and balances, of a nonpartisan civil service, of a government that serves all Americans. They are absolutely panicking because they know, even if they won't admit it publicly, that once this process of dismantling our institutions starts, it's very hard to reverse. Once the public sees that the emperor has no clothes, that the so-called experts are being driven out, that the bureaucracy isn't actually indispensable to the former guy's agenda, everything changes. And that's what they didn't want exposed. Not the individual scandals, not the specific failures, but the larger truth that the system they're building is not about serving you, it is about serving them, about consolidating power and silencing dissent. And the moment someone came along who was willing to challenge that, to actually drain the swamp of competence and replace it with cronyism, the whole facade started to crumble. So what does all of this mean for you, for your family, for the country? It means we're living through a moment of genuine peril, not the kind that politicians promise on the campaign trail and then forget about once they're in office, but real structural change that will reshape American government and society for generations and not for the better. It means that the stories you're hearing in the media, the ones that seem confusing, contradictory, or overblown, are often symptoms of this larger, dangerous transformation. And the more you understand the bigger picture, the less surprising any individual story becomes, and the more urgent the need to act It means that the narrative you've been fed for years, that government knows best, that experts should be trusted, that change is dangerous, is being challenged in real time. And the people who built their careers on that narrative are fighting back with everything they have. But here's the thing about truth, folks. Once it's out, it's very hard to put back in the box. And what we're witnessing right now is the slow, sometimes messy, but ultimately unstoppable process of the truth coming to light, that our institutions are under attack. The next few months are going to be critical. We're going to see even more attempts to consolidate power, especially through the budget process, and more Schedule F reclassifications designed to further dismantle our federal workforce. We'll likely see more challenges to voting rights and more efforts to politicize our justice system. So stay informed, ask questions, think critically, and don't let anyone tell you that what you're seeing isn't real or isn't important, because it is. And you, yes, you are part of the generation that lived through some of the most significant challenges to American democracy in our history. This isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning. And the next chapters are going to be written by the choices we make right now about accountability, about justice, about what kind of country we want to leave to our children and grandchildren. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more breakdowns of the stories that matter. And remember, the truth is worth fighting.